Our second reader tonight got her BA in English in Utah. She has 2 Masters of Fine Arts, one in literary translation, one in creative nonfiction. She received those from the University of Iowa. She is Colombian, and she grew up in and between Bogota and the US. These shifting formative experiences, along with her exploration of her cultural heritage and rich familial histories, are fodder for her collection of essays in Don't Come Back. She is an observer of the world, a manipulator of languages, and a translator of the space outside of convention, social order, and belonging. Please join me in welcoming Lina Maria Ferreira Cabeza Vanegas.
Thank you to everyone who has tried to say my name. I understand it's intimidating and terrible. None of it is my fault, for the record. Some people go out of their way to make their name complicated. I didn't. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, my homeboy Jefferson Beavers. Where is he? He left? Never mind. Thank you to the Normal School. It's just great to be here and such an honor to read with Jericho, who is not just brilliant but possibly has the best writer's name since William Carlos Williams. So this is an essay. I had an entirely different plan. I had printed it out. I rehearsed it in the plane. Then I got here and I met you guys. I'm like, that's not the right essay to read. This might still not be the right essay to read, but it is the one that I rewrote for you. And it was originally written to fit into the book, but once I sort of read through the whole thing, it just couldn't fit quite right, but it has like all the same characters and it sort of happens in the same time frame. And it's called The Man Walks In and Removes His Hat. I hope this works. Did you get water, Jericho? Just ignore the water? Okay. It's fine. Okay. You know, Jeanette says, I saw the devil once. Jeanette is my grandmother's nurse, and she says this as she wipes my grandmother's chin with a napkin. I'm sitting across from them at the kitchen table in my grandmother's Bogota apartment, right where I would sit after birthdays and Sunday dinners listening to my grandmother tell me about all the ghosts that used to haunt her and every demon that would, she promised, someday devour me. I pause. Do you mean the actual devil? My grandmother doesn't tell me stories anymore, doesn't speak to me, doesn't speak to anyone but Jeanette. Oh, but when we are alone, you should see it, Lina, how she goes on and on. Isn't that true, Doña Josefina? I've never seen it, and I doubt I ever will. It's difficult to picture this silent woman alone in a room with Jeanette, lively, friendly, arms waving, head thrown back, carcajadas, risas y sonrisas. I struggle to remember my grandmother laughing at all as I stare at her, slumped in a chair with a spine like a melting candle and eyes that skip shallowly over every object in view like a pebble across a black lake. Oh, how she tells me stories, don't you, Doña Josefina? The very one, Jeanette says. I saw the devil. While she feeds my grandmother beige slop, and the metal spoon makes a plastic thud when it crashes against her dentures. El mismísimo diablo. My grandmother opens and closes her mouth like a bird in an abandoned nest. Really? I straighten my back and lean in close. My grandmother's maid Kelly emerges from the kitchen, beating something in a plastic bowl. You know, the devil used to appear a lot more often before. Jeanette nods. Oh yeah, back when, real often. Both Kelly and Jeanette are from the more rural and tropical parts of Colombia, Bompos and Chiriguaná respectively, and it goes without saying that I stand at a great disadvantage in most things magical, being from the temperate weather Andean capital. I don't know what it is like, being from places where the heat rises from the earth and descends from the sky and crushes everything in between, and the devil still bothers to show up every so often. At least, Kelly says, he used to. Like when? I tap a granadilla fruit on the table, cracking its thin skull orange shell. Like, Jeanette feeds my grandmother another spoonful. Few years back, my mom's friend's friend, she saw him. Wait, what? I expected centuries, many decades at least, but Jeanette barely acknowledges my confusion and carries on with her story. My mother's friend's friend, she saw him and told her how it happened. Janet turns for a moment to remind my grandmother how to swallow. Ay, mama, traga, traga, sí, sí. He was a nightmare, this terrible, terrible boy. Like, how terrible? I ask while Kelly lingers in the doorframe, beating and nodding. Like she's seen the devil too. This boy, he used to throw these tantrums and yell and scream, terrible boy. He hit his own mother even. My grandmother hangs on Janet's every word, though I doubt she can understand much of it anymore. But his mother, she was good, forgiving, a saint. So one day, Janet takes a breath. She brings out his dinner, like always, a humble meal, and she sets it down right in front of him. I say, peeling the orange shell from around the white felt inner skin. And you know what he does? Janet swallows saliva and opens her mouth to remind my grandmother how it's done. This boy, he picks up the plate and he throws it. He didn't, I say. Did he? I imagine myself as a child throwing a plate at my formidable Colombian mother, and I remember the swing and snap and sting of her leather shoe insert against my skin. The gall, I say. Yes, Janet agrees. He was a terrible boy. Smashed it all to bits. Against the wall. No. Yes. Then what? Well, then comes a knock at the door. Right away? Right away. Do they answer? No. No? No. Janet raises her eyebrows and turns her head. Not they. He. The boy opens the door. Oh, I say, I see. Kelly is frying sweet plantain for lunch, but manages to emerge just at the right moments to punctuate the story with a nod or a sigh as if to say, yeah, that's how it happened. Wait, I say, pulling out a pen and a few napkins from a dispenser and start writing it all down. A tall man in a suit, Janet interjects. A tall man in a suit with fangs and horn and skin like melting wax. No? Just a suit, and he's handsome and dark-skinned too. I look at Janet skeptically. Are you sure? I tap my pen on the napkin where I've written all this down. I'm looking at her, dark, freckled complexion, and wonder if she's not just making devils in her own image. She raises her eyebrows. Yes, also he's handsome. Did you already write that down? The terrible boy opens the door and finds a man in a suit. He's dark-skinned and handsome. The man does not wait to be invited in, however. He simply walks in and removes his hat. No, Lena, Janet scoffs. Are you crazy? The devil does not wear a hat. I scratch out the sentence and start again. He walks in and wipes his forehead with a white handkerchief. Yes, Janet agrees. It's very hot. The handkerchief would make sense. The man, who is handsome but does not wear a hat, approaches the boy and surveys the damage. Lentils and rice drip down from the wall and onto the shattered porcelain on the floor. He takes a deep breath and says, "Boy, please open your mouth." And the terrible boy does as he is told. Wait, I interrupt. Really? Just like that, no question. I grab more napkins from the dispenser. Of course, Janet says, motioning with the spoon that my grandmother follows like a baited hook. It's the devil, Lena. So because this was the devil, and that is more than reason enough, the boy opens his mouth. But are you sure? I insist. Because I think if it were me, I might resist, a little at least. Well, Janet taps her chin. Maybe a little. But because no one is ever willingly dragged to hell, then the terrible boy snaps his mouth shut again and yells at the man in the suit, "No, I won't. And who the hell are you to make me?" But the devil does not respond. The devil does not have to. He glows white, blue, black, the flickering of a cold flame with a tisk of his tongue. The boy's jaw drops, and he stands there, wide-mouthed. Then the man reaches inside. Wait. I have ripped the napkin with my pen. Into the boy's mouth? Yes. Why? The boy's jaws are locked in place, pried open with invisible jacks and cold, blunt claws. Then the man approaches slowly. There is no rush, and he reaches inside into the young man's mouth like a plumber reaches into clogged gutters, like magicians reach into hats. And just as slow, just as calm, the man takes hold of the young man's tongue, digging his fingernails into it. I'm not sure about the fingernails, Janet says. Why not? Mi mama, she crosses herself in memory of her dead mother, she never mentioned anything about fingernails. But it's the devil, doesn't it seem right? Wouldn't he have long fingernails? Janet twists her mouth. Wants to give this to me, but this is a true story, she says. Of course, I nod emphatically, but tongues are slippery. That's true too, right? I wait for her to consider my point. Even if the nails aren't long, he must have them. And squeeze hard enough, they'll break the skin, right? And besides, how else would one get a grip? Well, she exhaled, I guess that is true. She looks up at the ceiling, giving it one more final go over before nodding. Yes, all right, fingernails then. The man can smell the boy's breath as he pushes him against the wall. He presses one hand against the boy's forehead to keep the head in place while he digs sharp fingertips and nails into a pink tongue, and he begins to pull. He yanks hard, once, twice, thrice, like he's trying to start a rusted lawnmower. Once, twice, thrice, until little membranes start to give like the white roots of sprawling weeds, and nerves begin to send screaming pulses up the young man's spine. The boy tries to scream, but it is a difficult thing to do with a man rhythmically tugging on his tongue once, twice, thrice. But he's also in a trance. He does not yell. He does not resist. He does not move. He allows the rhythmic motion of the tall man's tugging once, twice, thrice, again, repeat. It is as if the boy has already been tugged out of himself and is only able to watch the scene from a little distance with the sound turned all the way down. He can only hear the sound of a fly crashing against the window pane, lentils dripping from the wall, the fabric of the man's coat stretching around the seams, but then also the fizzing taste of rust. The boy swallows blood and it tastes to him like antidote. Suddenly, he begins to come back into himself and he starts to squirm and struggle. He kicks the man in the ankle, kicks him in the shins. He reaches up and tries to scratch out the man's eyes. And for a moment, he feels the man's grip loosen. Only a moment, because it is just a shifting of forces. The man swats the boy's hands away, kicks his legs out from under him. He grabs his half-torn tongue like a fistful of hair. But what about the mother? I asked Jeanette. What about her? Jeanette wipes my grandmother's chin with a metal spoon. Where is she while all this is happening? Well, Jeanette motions with her head to a corner of the room. Over there. And I look as if she might actually be standing there. What do you mean? I ask. Well, what do you mean? Wouldn't she, I'm not sure how to phrase it, intervene? The boy can barely scream. He gags and gargles and chokes on his own blood. Yeah, that's right. Changed it a lot for this. It's just the boy can barely scream. He gags and gargles and chokes on his own blood. But this is enough for a mother. She feels the devil's hand as if it were inside her own mouth and around her own neck. So she shakes off whatever power has been holding her back. She throws herself at the man in the suit. She wraps her arms around his neck like a noose and yells at her son to go, go, go. Yes, Jeanette concedes. That sounds right, patting my grandmother on the forearm. Mothers are very forgiving. This reminds me of the time my younger sister split her bottom lip against the metal corner of a full-force rusty jungle gym swing. Midway down, wood, metal, and meat. It was a lip like an open book, pages ripped apart, a vertical line made into two horizontal ones, and an endless well of red in the middle. I remember my mother pushing down crowds and kicking moving cars until she got my sister to the hospital. I remember another day when my grandmother saved me from my mother and her leather shoe insert after I'd done something particularly egregious. If you hit this child, she said to my mother, I will pull down your pants and beat you right back. It is one of my favorite memories of her. A frail body even then, standing between the cannon and the fodder before she even knew what I'd done. As Jeanette brushes my grandmother's hair behind her ear, I recall the time that, from her wheelchair, she also tried to beat Jeanette with her cane. It is only a moment, a few seconds, no more, but a few seconds are enough for the young man to kick his way out from under the man and in the suit and run to the door. He is going to leave the room. He is going to run outside into the bushes, down the river, and out of the town. He is going to disappear, and he is going to buy stationery in a corner shop in Madrid, in Buenos Aires, in Bogota, and he is going to write his mother a letter from a far-off city where the devil does not visit. An apology on pink stationery with little white flowers on the corner like the ones on his mother's favorite china, the ones he broke against the wall all those years back. That's what the boy, because really he's still just a boy, tells himself between one moment and the next. But somewhere in the mesh of white nylon ligaments and red yarn nerves, he already knows that he will never leave this room again. He hears whispers the instant he places his hand on the doorknob, a cold, burning, solid sound, something mercurial and acid that flows and fills and then congeals between the spaces of his ear canals and the lock inside the door. He feels the sound like squirming pus and swelling eggs in his inner ear, and he screams, he clutches his ears, and despite the crimson sound pulsing behind his eyes, he still tries to turn the knob. But, of course, there is no use. He tries to pull and then push, and then he bangs his fist on the wood as if someone were waiting for him on the other side. But since the knob won't turn, the boy finally does. The man stands perfectly still and perfectly composed in the middle of the room as a fly hits the glass one last time and collapses on the windowsill. There are no stains on the man's suit, no scrapes where he has been struck, no prints where he has been kicked, and no blood on his hands at all. So the boy begins to understand. This is not the devil of contracts and compromises. This is the devil of gavels and scales. His pockets are full of pulled teeth and plucked eyes, and what a mother is willing to forgive has no bearing on the task at hand. He has tossed the boy's mother across the room already. Now she lays there unconscious atop shards of broken china. The man does not take his eyes off of the boy. He seems immobile and frozen in place, like he's always been there, like the jungle is always gnawing at the edges of cities of men. Only, of course, he must have moved. He must have, because he was there, just right there, right there, right there, and now here, right now, right here, now with his hand around the boy's throat and tossing him to the ground. Then the man in the suit puts a foot on the boy's neck and a hand inside his mouth, and he pulls out the tongue like a sword from a stone. Just like that. My handwriting has evolved into feral scratches while I tried to catch up. And Jeanette gently wipes my grandmother's mouth with a clean napkin, calling her mommy and mama, looking at her with more tenderness than I've ever mustered for anything on this earth. And I wonder if Jeanette knows that my grandmother would never have allowed this before her mind began to slip. They never know their place, these people, she used to say, always trying to igualársele a uno, sit at the table with you as if they were anything like you, same as you, the gall. I feel a tightness in my chest. Yes, Jeanette says. That is what must have happened. I look up at her. Then what? Then what? Then the end? Jeanette pauses, tilts her head back, looking at the ceiling like people glance at dictionaries, tarot decks, history. My grandmother used to correct me. Not stories, Lena. History is what I tell you. He pulls, Jeanette clarifies, until the boy is dead. The boy is dead? Yes, of course, Lena. What did you think? And then he leaves. I remember standing on hallways and behind doors as a child, secretly listening to adults and news anchors as they named and counted the ways that men in the jungle, in the mountains, in the back alleys might cut up a body. The one where the penis was stuck inside the mouth, the testicles inside the mouth, the head tucked like a baby in the wrapped arms of a headless torso, the belly hollowed out like a vase and severed limbs stuck inside it like wilting flowers, the one where the tongue is slipped through the slit in the neck like a very short tie, a Colombian tie. This one for the snitch, this one for the traitor, this one for the liberal, this one for the copper. This one, and this one, and this one for the terrible man, the terrible woman, the terrible child, for the terribly unlucky and terribly helpless in these terrible times. This was before I knew anything. Before I knew that the tongue is a circular muscle and not a long strip of wet leather sliding down a constricting throat. Knew that it would take quite a bit of practice and patience and knife work to get the job done and to get it to look just right. Or how we get one violencia mixed with another violence, get tangled in the mess of severed limbs laid out at our feet. It wasn't the cartel's innovation, like I first learned, but the chulavitas during La Violencia of the 40s and 50s that in defense of their land and their party first reimagined the body like a set of spare parts to reassemble into grotesque threats and monstrous metaphors of an alienated nation. I rest my head in my hands and think how my grandmother was barely 18 when La Violencia started. Already 2 years into a decade of savage rural violence and mutilation, then barely 20 when she married an Air Force pilot at the beginning of what would become a 5-decade civil conflict, and barely 32 when that pilot fell to the earth strapped to a faulty parachute while fighting what would become one of the major guerrilla groups in that conflict. Dominoes and breadcrumbs and chain smoker wars, one lighting the next and the next and the next. I feel my face beneath my fingers and want to poke them through my skin like pencils into ripe plums. I thought, I don't know, that it was just a tongue, that he might live after all. He doesn't. No, of course not. It's a devil, Lena. Yes, I know. I write "until dead" on my napkin and retrace the words until they are bold. And then I ask, the end? Yes.